Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. I'm really pleased to be able to join you remotely from what is today quite a wet and rainy Bristol. I am going to be speaking about some research we published earlier this year on the topic of fairly reducing car use in Scottish cities. So this research sits in IPPR's Fair Transition Unit. I joined IPPR about 2 years ago to work on the Cross-Party Environmental Justice Commission. And that commission was founded on the premise that tackling the climate and nature crises can be done in a way that furthers social and economic kind of goals, can make life better for people. So really echoing what Jamie said there as well. And transport decarbonisation, so reducing emissions from transport, which we know is something that urgently needs to happen across the whole of the UK and including in Scotland, is a really great example of how you can do this. So we know we need to reduce emissions. We know that's really urgent and important. And actually the argument on that's broadly been won. So I think, when we think about the climate crisis, the argument on the need to act feels like there's a lot of agreement around that, a lot of consensus. The challenge is when you get into the detail of how you do it, and how you do it when it comes to something like transport decarbonisation can either lock in inequity that's built into the current system at the moment, or it can improve health, it can improve well-being, it can improve people's quality of life, particularly those most disadvantaged by the status quo. So the Fair Transition Unit was born out of the Environmental Justice Commission to further this work on how to rapidly decarbonise whilst at the same time improving quality of life and in reducing inequality. And this research focuses on fairly reducing car use in Scottish cities, and it's a response partly to the Scottish Government's plan for reaching net zero by 2045 and target to reduce the overall distance travelled by cars by 20% by 2030. It also responds to the conclusions of Scotland's Just Transition Commission, which was a body that was set up by the Scottish Government to advise on how to fairly reach net zero. So they recognise that the existing transport systems don't serve everybody equally, and they entrench social inequality. And in order to change this, we must involve more people, particularly marginalised groups, in decision making. This work therefore focuses on low-income households, which are a group who are less likely to own a car, more likely to suffer the disadvantages of people driving. So, for example, if you live in a poor neighbourhood, if you are on a low income, you're more likely to be in an area with really bad levels of air pollution. You're more likely to experience high volumes of traffic and the noise pollution and things like community severance that go with that. So, for example, think about how your interactions with your neighbours and the people across the street work if you've got a really busy road in between you with lots of cars on. And in fact, a child in the poorest neighbourhoods in Scotland who are walking or cycling to get around are more than 3 times more likely to be involved in a traffic accident than those living in the richest areas. I find that statistic really stark. So our research question was, how can interventions designed to reduce car use in cities meet the expectations and needs of people living on low incomes? And just to give a quick definition there, when we talk about low incomes in this research, mostly, unless I sort of say otherwise, we're talking about people living on a household income of less than £15,000 per year. So what did we do with the research? So, my slide should have clicked on. There we are. It did. Fantastic. Our research methods. So this involved a 2-day deliberative workshop with residents of Glasgow from low-income households. So that's the poll and the workshop. Both the low-income households were people who had less than an annual income of less than £15,000 a year. We had 11 participants, and they were both regular car users and those without access to a car, and a mix of ethnicities, ages, came from different places in the city. It included people with disabilities. So really different people who lived in Glasgow, who lived on those low incomes, and we worked with them to talk through some of the evidence that we have, a bit of our research, but really importantly to hear from them, because the way that these processes work, these deliberative processes, are very much founded on the idea that we bring expertise in the room as well. We provide information, give people the opportunity to challenge and question that information, and they do that because they are experts too. They're experts in their own lives, in their lived experience of what it's like to be on a low income in Glasgow, for example, what it's like to be able to get around or not be able to get around because of where you live and your particular situation. So that was a really important part of our research. We also did a national poll in Scotland of residents in low income urban areas. So all of this research is focused on urban areas. That's because we see the opportunity to reduce car use as being something that is really, there's a big opportunity in urban areas to do that. And we did that with YouGov, a sample of 500 residents, which was the maximum group size available for this research. And then we also did interviews with practitioners, capturing lessons learned from previous current initiatives to reduce car usage. And we did a rapid evidence review, so very traditional classic stuff there, looking at the research that was already out there. So that's what we did. What did we find? So I'm just going to talk through now sort of 6 principles that arose from all of the research. A lot of it is drawn from the lived experiences of the people that we spoke with in Glasgow, and what we heard through the poll and through the research. And so the first of these is that we need to build on existing support for climate action and a desire for transformative change, but mustn't take it for granted. We had really strong support for climate action and an understanding of the need to change the transport system. So, for example, the majority of people agreed that reducing the need for cars would make Scotland a fairer country. Our polling also showed significant support for a wide range of quite specific policies relating to the reallocation of road space, restrictions on car use, promotion of walking and cycling. I think that's really important to emphasise that, because I think there is a broad sort of recognition that people support action in kind of theory, but actually they did support the action when it came down, when the rubber hits the road almost, to the details of some of the policies. That there was quite a lot of support for those as well. But really importantly, that support is qualified. So this is a group for whom reducing the cost of transport is a really important priority. And they are concerned, and quite understandably concerned, about being asked to change behaviour without it feeling like the options are available to support those changes. So they don't want to be disadvantaged by change. They've got enough going on. So the second one, which I think is a really key one, is the importance of treating sustainable transport as a public good, so something that everyone should be able to access and afford. So over 60% of people on low incomes in Scotland said they worry about being able to afford transport. At the same time, you're less likely to own a car if you're on a low income. 51% of people from households with incomes of up to 10k in this case use the bus at least once a month. That 51% is compared with the 27% of those on an income of more than 50k. So really big difference in things like bus usership depending on your income. So you're more likely to take the bus if you're on a low income. You're also more likely for the bus not to really serve your needs. So transport tends to be designed around the needs of commuters. So trips going in and out of city centre, those sorts of trips are prioritised. The more local trips around an area that you might use for shopping, childcare, kind of getting around in your local neighbourhood, those don't tend to be sort of prioritised in transport planning. So it's a system that doesn't serve everybody's needs equally. And so you've got a challenge here. You've got to sort of mitigate the effects of living on a low income in how you conduct your day-to-day life. So you've got the mental and practical burden of making ends meet, and so the unreliability, the inconvenience of public transport, that makes a really big difference to you. So if you have, for example, if you live on a low income and you have children and you've really planned out exactly how you're going to get about your day, how you're going to make it work, how you're going to get people to where they need to be, you don't have the flex in your budget, you don't have the flex in your time to be able to accommodate things going wrong. And the problem at the moment is with public transport is that things go wrong too often. So getting public transport right is really, really important for people who live on a low income. It's also worth noting that the kind of actual travel behaviour of people on low incomes might not reflect their true travel needs. So some travel is discretionary, and if you can't afford to do it, then you don't do it. But, and I think this is really, this is sort of key to the research, is that mobility provides access to so much. It provides access to opportunity, to work, to social support, to childcare, to being able to shop cheaply. If you have to only shop by getting to the local little shops, everything's more expensive. If you can get to a bigger shop where it's a bit cheaper, you might be able to save some costs there, etc. So there's a lot built in there that mobility can really provide you with access to. And public transport on its own isn't going to fix all these problems. And public transport alone isn't going to fix your emissions problems. But for social justice, you do need it alongside reducing car use. All of our research points to the fact that that is essential. And that experience of using public transport needs to be safe and welcoming. We heard from people talking about the kind of challenges that they experienced at the moment using transport in Glasgow. So we celebrate often in the transport world, we celebrate public transport and active travel, so walking and cycling, for increasing social interactions. But the challenge faced by many people living on low incomes means that actually they're often the victims of discrimination, they're anxious about interactions with others, and we heard people talking about racism, about ageism, and that was from public interactions, but it was from people like bus drivers and things as well. And then on the kind of cultural significance point, this workshop took place in Glasgow, where 27% of vehicle journeys are 1 kilometre or less. Using your car is a real cultural thing in Glasgow. It's a very normalised thing. So shifting the kind of norms around that is going to be really important. People talked about it sort of being like a rite of passage, getting your driver's licence. So shifting that is going to be key. As is involving the public. So it's something that I feel very passionately about. So particularly the most vulnerable, they need to be engaged in scheme design and delivery. And interestingly, we talked to the group, and they don't necessarily want every single one of them to be engaged all of the time, partly recognising that not everybody has kind of all of the time available to be able to participate in that way. But what they do want to know is someone like me being engaged with? Is someone like me being represented, being listened to? And it's so important that people feel that they matter. They want the feedback loops to know that what they've said is being listened to, that it's seen as important, it's considered. And actually what was interesting is, we had somebody from Glasgow City Council talking with the group. We presented various bits of evidence about what was happening in the city. And this group were actually really surprised about what was already happening. They weren't aware about all the good stuff that was out there already. So coming to our final two ones, so we found that those on low incomes are more likely to support bans and restrictions, so you can't do this, than policies that charge for behaviours you're trying to reduce. Basically seeing this as a way for people who are wealthier to kind of get out of doing stuff. So 78% of poll respondents supported stopping the most polluting vehicles from entering areas of high pollution. So policies that were focused on, charging, making people pay. So things like increasing parking charges, for example, they were met with much more resistance, a sense of, don't charge me more to do this thing, just don't let me do it at all. Otherwise, it's just not fair. And people getting anxious about, well, I can't afford to pay more for parking. So people being quite worried about kind of what that would look like in practice for them. And a real sense of currently at the moment, this is not fair. The situation is not fair, and that needs to be addressed, and that it can't be down to them as individuals who they aren't the main sources of the problem. They don't feel like they're the key contributors. In fact, they aren't the key contributors. It can't be left to them. It's not down to whether or not they take their son to the football match on Sunday in the car or not. It can't be down to that level. It's got to be a more joined up approach. It's got to also be much more fairly shared by everybody. And then finally, the idea that, and this came through very strongly from the practitioners that we spoke with, that you need to embed the goal of reducing car use across all government strategies and diversify the transport sector. So this is very much about the importance of linking up different policy agendas, meeting lots of goals through your transport policy, but also recognising that transport policy alone isn't going to get the job done. So, for example, when we're thinking about the need to reduce trips, the planning system, digital connectivity, all of these sorts of things are going to make a massive difference to your ability to be able to do that. It's not just down to your transport system. And we also have a situation where the UK government's policy, for example, on fuel duty, makes things harder and is at risk of undermining the efforts and the communication strategies of the devolved governments and authorities, who have much more ambitious targets about transport and in particular about car reduction. So a few things that we saw as being really important coming out of this, we wanted to see stretching targets at a local authority level as well as a Scottish Government level, and with more clarity on how they'd be achieved. Delivering road space reallocation at pace and scale, it's a no-brainer from where we got to. And also in particular, the sort of more citywide initiatives are the better. People really felt that from a fairness point of view. A much more equal relationship between communities and policymakers is needed. So, for example, we recommend things like more deliberative processes, engaging specific kind of communities who are often marginalised more in decision making. Public transport, as I've said, is a really key one to ensuring your fairness is built into your decarbonisation plans. So things like free bus travel for people on universal credit, but also things like making the experience of people more welcoming through things like better staff training and feedback. And then a need to rebalance funding away from roads, even more than's already been done, diversify the sector and align the whole public sector behind reducing car use. So sort of the final thought that I'd leave you with is low-income households are lower carbon emitters. They aren't driving the climate crisis, and they aren't doing most of the driving of the cars that are filling our streets. And they're worried about affording the cost of driving and of not driving. And I think kind of crucially, transport has the potential to exacerbate or alleviate hardship. Affordable, reliable, accessible, safe transport supports people's ability to work, learn, participate, access support, be physically and mentally healthy. So people on low incomes therefore stand to gain significantly from making our transport system not just greener, but also more equitable. And I'll leave you there with that thought.